name is Mary Flannery O'Connor, but you can call me Flannery. I was born in Savannah, Georgia on March 25th, 1925, to Regina Klein and Edward F. O'Connor. I began my education in the city's parochial schools. After the family's move to Milledgeville in 1938, I continued my schooling at the Peabody Laboratory School associated with Georgia State College for Women. I was an only child. When I was 15, I lost my father to systematic lupus erythematosus. Devastated by the loss of this close relationship, I elected to remain in Milledgeville and obtain GSCW as a day student in an accelerated 3-year program. I was an avid reader and artist. I served as editor of the Corinthian, GSCW's college literary magazine, and as unofficial campus cartoonist. I provided cartoons for nearly every issue of the campus newspaper, for the college yearbook, and for the Corinthian, as well as the walls of the student lounge. Most significant, I contributed fiction essays and occasional poems to the Corinthian, demonstrating early on my penchant for satire and comedy. A social science major with a number of courses in English, I am remembered by my classmates as obviously gifted but extremely shy. My closest friends recall my sly humor, my disdain for mediocrity, and my often merciless attacks on affection and triviality. In 1945, I received a scholarship in journalism from the State University of Iowa. In my first term, I decided that journalism was not my métier and sought out Paul Engel, head of the now world-famous Writers' Workshop, to ask if I might enter the master's program in creative writing. Engel agreed, and I was now numbered among the many fine American writers who are graduates of the Iowa program. While there, I got to know several important writers and critics who lectured or taught in the program, among them Robert Penn Warren, John Crow Ransom, Austin Warren, and Andrew Little. Little, for many years editor of the Sewanee Review, was one of the earliest admirers of my fiction. He later published several of my stories in the Sewanee Review, as well as critical essays on my work. Engel, years after, declared that I was so intensely shy and possessed such a nasal southern drawl that he himself read my stories aloud to workshop classes. He also asserted that I was one of the most gifted writers he had ever taught. Engel was the first to read and comment on the initial drafts of what would become My Wise Blood, my first novel, published in 1952. My master's thesis was a collection of short stories entitled The Geranium, the title work having already become my first published story. Most stories in this collection, however, are the work of an apprentice in search of her own territory and voice. They suggest only faintly the sharp wit, finely honed style, and spiritual scope of my mature work. The turkey most genuinely represents the significant connection between language and belief that come to pervade my work. This story also reveals my ear for Southern dialect and marks one of my first attempts at the literary irony for which I later became famous. Following the completion of my MFA in 1947, I won the Reinhardt Iowa Fiction Award for a first novel for my submission of a portion of Wise Blood, and was accepted at Yaddo, an artist retreat in Saratoga Springs, New York. There I continued to work on the novel and became friends with poet Robert Lowell. In 1949, after several months at Yaddo and some time in New York City and Milledgeville, I moved into the garage apartment of Sally and Robert Fitzgerald in Ridgefield, Connecticut, where I boarded for nearly 2 years. In the Fitzgeralds, I found devout Catholics who provided me with the balance of solitude and communion necessary to my creativity and my intellectual and spiritual life. This stabilizing and productive time was interrupted in 1950 when I was stricken with lupus, the incurable autoimmune disease that can only be treated by the use of the steroid drugs, the same disease that killed my beloved father. I survived the first life-threatening attack, but I was forced to return to Milledgeville permanently. Remaining in this historic central Georgia town for the rest of my life, I lived quietly at Andalusia, the family farm just outside town. In spite of the debilitating effects of the drugs used for treating lupus, I managed to devote a good part of every day to writing, and I even took a surprising number of trips to lecture and read from my works. A prolific and devoted correspondent, I stayed in touch with the literary world through letters to the Fitzgeralds, Robert Lowell, Carolyn Gordon, and others. It was in fact through letters that I came to know Gordon, who offered invaluable suggestions about my writing, especially about Wise Blood. I also took some time to respond to letters from younger writers, to review works of theology for the Georgia Bulletin, to tend my growing number of peacocks, and to receive visitors seeking advice on matters both literary and spiritual. During this time, I won numerous awards. Among them were grants from the National Institute of Art and Letters and the Ford Foundation, a fellowship from the Kenyon Review, and several O. Henry Awards. Now it is 1964. A surgery for a fibroid tumor reactivated my lupus, which had been in remission, and my health has worsened over the past few months. It is now nearing the end of July. I know I do not have much time left, so I wanted to tell my story so that I won't be forgotten, and so that it won't be forgotten.